Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second NABT virtual meeting. I'm Jason Gold, your president. There are over 150 of you that have signed up for this meeting, and we are really delighted with the response. We have some people joining a little late. I see the numbers are clicking up and up and up. I hope we will provide you with important and valuable information. And with all that's going on these days, we can't have enough information. A special welcome to the Subchapter 5 trustees. We have a bunch of you that are joining us today. And a quick reminder that NABT membership is free for you for the remainder of this year if you sign up, as it is free for brand new Chapter 7 panel trustees who want to sign up for membership. So if you haven't done that yet, I encourage you to do that. You'll find, as we all do, that NABT is just a great organization. Before I turn it over to Kelly and Gary, there's just a few announcements I want to pass along to you. The Executive Office for U.S. Trustees has been in touch with us on a regular basis. And we've had 3 calls with Cliff White and his senior staff since the crisis has hit. And they have told us the overarching advice from them, as many of you know, is that they have delegated to the regional U.S. trustees and the local assistant U.S. trustees decisions on how to conduct 341s. The only nationwide rule, really just about the only one, is that in-person 341s are of course prohibited for the foreseeable future. As you know, there have been general orders entered by many of the judges around the country. At last count, it was something like 28, maybe a couple more jurisdictions where the judges have issued general orders regarding the conduct of 341s and other things. So it makes sense that the local U.S. trustees that have to deal with the clerk's offices and the judges, that they make the rules and set up the procedures for us in the conduct of what we do. Trustees are being assigned specific phone lines. That is, we each get our own phone number to conduct 341s. Many of you know that already, but some may not. Many of us will be getting government-approved digital recorders shipped to us. We understand that's in process, but there are other means that are being approved for the conduct of 341s besides a simple phone call, such as Zoom and some other apps, although recently, last couple of days, there's been questions about security, whether or not these apps are really secure. So more on that later, I suppose. Debtor audits have been suspended. Not that we care that much about that, but it's something that the U.S. trustee has done. Cliff also wanted me to pass along to our membership that he and his staff are very much concerned, as you can tell, with the challenges that we're facing, not only in how we do our work and how we conduct our 341s, but they really are concerned and worried about our personal health and that of our families. In fact, many of you know that at least one trustee, who happens to be a very close friend of mine, tested positive for the virus, and he has been very sick. I think he's going to be okay, but we're all worried about him. If you know of anyone, any other trustee or family member of a trustee who is sick and they're comfortable with sharing the information, please let me know, because I'd like to know about that. And the U.S. trustee, the executive office, wants to know also, because they're likewise concerned. So let's get started. We'll turn it over to Kelly and Gary. First, just to let you know, I'm going to have to be leaving you after about 25 minutes because my local U.S. trustee is having his phone call to advise us how to proceed. So I'm going to leave you after about 25 minutes. Our panelists, again, just like last week, Kelly Hagan, Chapter 7 trustee from Traverse City, Michigan, past NABT president, and also Gary Seitz, who is in Philadelphia, sits as a panel trustee. Gary also does Chapter 11 trustee work in Wilmington. So with that, Gary, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, we'll start out today by going through sort of the ground rules. First of all, be sure to check your audio. If it's your screen is like mine, there's a panel on the right-hand side that shows your microphone. Everyone has been muted, but if we call on you, we can unmute your line, but your audio still has to be open for you to be able to participate. If you send a message to the organizers, if you're having any difficulty during the session, they can reach out to you to help you with any of that. You can participate. You can raise your hand to be recognized. You can also in the comments box raise your questions, and we'll try to get to all of those if possible. We were at the last session. We'll see if we can do that again today. If you are speaking, we ask you try to keep your comments as concise as possible, hopefully within 2 minutes, so we can get to as many people that would like to speak as possible and get the widest range of experiences across the country. You can give us your experience. That would be helpful. You can also ask questions of the audience generally, and we'll try to address those. We want this to be as much of a community-oriented forum really as possible. We do plan to try to complete the meeting by 3 o'clock, so you can kind of keep that in mind. And you don't have to worry, you are not on camera. It's only the three of us that are on camera, so don't worry about that. Finally, the invitation for the meeting went out to the NABT membership generally, so just keep in mind that the audience includes trustees, trustee assistants, professionals, and potentially members of the Office of the United States Trustee. With that, I think we will move on to the actual discussion itself. Again, the purpose of these forums is to discuss ideas dealing with practices as a result of the COVID-19 situation, or any relevant ideas that you might have, or brainstorms, or any actual experiences. I think Jennifer will start by introducing some polls. We're going to question you a little bit during the course of the proceedings today. So we'll ask if you go ahead and answer the poll questions to the best of your ability as we go through. We'll collect the information, and we'll also let you know the results as the proceedings continue. I guess while the polls are being responded to, I'll just talk generally about some recent, I should say also, we don't plan to go over ground that we covered it during the last session. Jennifer Brinkley has put up a wonderful web page on the NABT website that contains summaries of the information we went through last time. And there's also an audio file that you can click to actually listen to that at that time. So we're just going to kind of move on from our discussions last week. So I'll just talk briefly about the developments that our district dealt, or our district dealt with the Office of U.S. Trustee and COVID-19 issues. The big issue this week was how to provide notice to creditors that might want to participate in the meetings. As a result of that, the U.S. trustee for our region sent down some text that was published on the court's website to alert creditors about how to participate and what's being done, and also asked that the trustees enter docket entries that would reflect how creditors or other interested parties could participate in the 341 meetings. It caused us a lot of concern because this obviously was going to be an additional task that trustees would have to undertake without any additional compensation. So we raised a lot of issues, had some very productive conversations with our local office. We're able to get an introduction to the clerk's office and the clerk's staff in developing a docket entry that would accommodate this request of the U.S. trustee in a efficient manner on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I worked with my software provider to help automate the process to be able to meet the requirements of the U.S. trustees guidelines, but do it in an automated fashion from the 341A list that's actually generated in my software. It took pretty much all week to get the process going, but I'm happy to say this morning I was able to essentially batch notice 51 meetings of creditors that I have next week, and basically just sat there and watched the computer do all of the heavy lifting over a period of about 15 minutes to get the job done. So I was very, very happy with that. So I would highly encourage anyone that has the same issue, reach out not just to the U.S. trustee's office, but the clerk's office, because there are methods of technology available to make this process much easier for the trustees going forward.
So Gary, is your clerk's office sending out the notice to all creditors on the matrix for each case?
No, the clerk's office has volunteered to send out notices to creditors for the, there were 3 trustees that didn't want to try to deal with this on the regular scheduled list and just kind of did mass continuances to an undetermined date. The clerk's office volunteered to resend out notices for those 3 trustees for those 3 listings, but wasn't willing to send out notices to creditors for the change in process. In other words, instead of it being a 341 notice for a particular location, it was now going to be done by remote conferencing, and how that would be done. That was left up to the trustees to figure out with the Office of the U.S. Trustee.
I know there are concerns about that. In our district, we are doing much like you're doing. We're putting an entry on the docket, ideally a week before the meeting, that it's being conducted either by telephone or Zoom or both. And then I posted a notice on the courthouse, which is where we have our 341s, instructing people who do show up at the courthouse to call the trustees ASAP. I'm hoping that covers, 99% of the situations. But.
Yeah, we have a very low attendance of creditors at meetings in our district, so I don't know that this is that big of a concern, frankly, for the amount of work that's gone into addressing it. But I think that now with a notice on the court doc, on the court's website, that they should reach out to debtors counsel or the trustee, and then the actual docket entry itself, I think they're pretty well, noticed, so to speak.
It looks like we have a few questions that are coming in. You guys want to take those questions? First one is, do we know if there is an announced end date for telephonic hearings that is currently in place? Is there an official end date yet?
I know it's been extended to May 10th.
Right.
It wouldn't surprise any of us if it gets further extended, obviously.
That's correct. Yeah, you should at least count on that far out.
Another question is, I'm interested in learning how other trustees are handling pro se debtors and submission of the required documents. My office staff are working remotely and receiving paper documents in the mail is difficult.
So in my office, even prior to this, we have a procedure when a debtor files a case pro se, we send a letter out to the debtor. I think it just helps the cases go more smoothly. We ask the debtors to mail us documents, to provide us information on how to contact them. And we generally have good compliance. And I've had a couple of pro se debtors during this period, and I've had good luck in conducting my meetings remotely with them as well. So I would encourage people to reach out to them sooner rather than later. I know in my office, I'm the one getting the mail. I have a scanner at my home office. My assistant has a scanner at her home office. So we're well set up once we receive documents to put them into our system.
Okay,
And,
good.
and for pro se, I've had a few pro se debtors get up to the point of the 341 meeting, but I noticed that most of those cases are being dismissed in my district for failure to file the appropriate things, or not having a certificate of credit counseling, things like that. So a lot of them are actually kind of being weeded out, so to speak, before we get to the meeting. A couple of them had difficulty trying to get the documents to my office, even by mail. They didn't want to go to the post office, completely understandable. For things as simple as a tax return, I told them if they just used their cell phone and took photographs of each page, they could forward those to me, and I would accept that, at least for the time being. Several of them I've had to continue kind of indefinitely because I just can't figure out any other way to deal with it.
I think probably with regards to PII concerns, they should be encouraged to white out or black out the social security number, minor children's names, et cetera, before they do that.
That's a good idea.
Good idea.
Jennifer, why don't you put up the results of some of these questions we've been asking? I think we could probably skip the first one. Okay, this is the different technology. It looks like most trustees are using a simple phone call. Kelly and Gary, do you think that'll hold up, or do you sense that people are moving towards the video services?
I know it's my preference to do them by video where possible, and I've followed Gary's suggestion and I've paid for Zoom. You can do the pro plan for about $15 a month on a month-to-month basis. Gives you additional features. I do know we've been told in our district that Zoom is the only video conference approved so far by the trustee's office, notwithstanding some of the things you're reading about in the papers. I did a few by FaceTime, kind of in an interim period before we had some of this information and guidance, but at a time when I decided early that I was going to do mine remotely.
Okay.
I know there are a lot. I've spoken with a lot of trustees in my district, and then since last week, I've had a lot of trustees reaching out to me separately about this whole process. And I know that there's a lot of trustees that don't feel comfortable using the technology to go forward on the one hand. And the other comment that I'm hearing is because the U.S. trustee has provided these numbers, that they feel that that's somehow the preferred way of proceeding with the meetings. But from my own personal perspective, I just find it extremely difficult to manage a day-long phone conference to do 341 meetings. And I really feel that it's really no way to get a real identification of the debtor during the meeting. So that's why I just am shying away from it to the broadest possible extent.
And obviously there's facial cues and just, that interaction, you're seeing it now. This would be a much different interplay if you were just listening to us on the phone. One question I do have, my next meetings, I was intending to have the conference line active and going and have that on speakerphone, and also be doing meetings by Zoom where possible. But I've had a couple of situations lately where when you have a couple of different devices going, you get a lot of feedback. Has anybody done meetings and had Zoom and a phone call going at the same time?
That's a good question. Just post your responses on the question page, which you'll see on the right side of your screen.
Because Zoom does allow the option to have people call in as well, even if they can't do the video conference.
Well, while we're waiting for some comments on that, how do you keep the 341s moving along? Do you find that there's a glitch with technology? Someone doesn't know how to use it, and you waste 10 minutes? Has that happened, or has it been pretty smooth?
Actually, I've been pretty lucky. So my meetings were scheduled, my 341s were scheduled for St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. And 2 days before that, I decided I was going to do all meetings remotely. Sent an email out to the bar, copied attorneys who generally appear on behalf of creditors, and asked people to get back with me ASAP, whether they had FaceTime technology, whether they could use Zoom technology on another device. And with the exception of just a couple of meetings, I conducted everything by Zoom or FaceTime. And I do 6 meetings an hour. I scheduled them all in 10-minute increments so that people knew that they were at 9:10 or 9:20 or 9:30. And I found that helpful. That may not be necessary going forward with a paid subscription to Zoom, because one of the things Gary pointed out to me is it does allow people to be placed essentially in a waiting room, and then the trustee can bring into the meeting, basically activate the screen for only certain people. And I may be doing that in the future.
Yeah, I found the waiting room feature the last time I did 341s extremely valuable. In fact, in a lot of ways, it was easier than a regular 341 because I didn't have to get out of my chair and go out to the meeting room to call people. I could just pull people in, by dragging their screen and pulling it into the meeting room, find out who it is. If it's not someone I needed for that meeting, just tell them I'm putting them back in the waiting room and just, wait until their case is called. It seemed to me to be very efficient and really a virtual equivalent of what we do anyway.
Okay, Jennifer, why don't we go to the next question? Next poll question. Now, this is an important question because we want to know how you're interacting with your local U.S. trustees. And I know the executive office really would like to know as well. And just to remind everyone, it's all anonymous, so don't be afraid to answer truthfully, honestly. And we'll wait for about 10 more seconds.
Some of the questions we got from last week, one was, how do you teach old dogs like trustees new tricks? I have to say that, and obviously I'm a strong advocate of Zoom, so I guess you have to be a little patient with me, but Zoom actually has on its website a lot of helpful videos and how-tos that since we have a little more time these days, you can sit down and learn a few things with new technology pretty easily.
Okay, it looks like the U.S. trustees are getting really good marks here with 31% excellent and 46% good. That's 70, what is that, 77%. So that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
I know in our district, our assistant U.S. trustee is holding meetings by phone twice a week, Mondays and Fridays, just touching base, going over the latest guidance information we have. So I feel like we're really fortunate in our district.
All right, with that, I'm going to have to leave you all, and let me just say thank you to everyone who's attending, and I'm going to drop off.
Thanks, Jason, so much for your work.
Thank you. So we have a couple other questions we may be able to answer real quick. I think that the waiting room feature is a part of the paid version with Zoom. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
In follow-up to this last poll question with regards to communication and direction from the U.S. Trustee's Office, people should feel free to contact one of us. We'll treat the submission anonymously. We'll need to know probably what, district at least you're in or region you're in. And we can work with the executive office on improving those communications. So if you could give some specific requests or recommendations, that would be helpful. I do know that there was a comment or a question, lessons learned from subchapter 5 cases. I am a subchapter 5 trustee. I'm in the middle of my first real subchapter 5 case. I say that because my first one was a mistake basically by the debtor's attorney. But one lesson I take from it, and perhaps it's simply because it's consistent with how I would approach this or practice anyway, is we don't have the luxury of just putting things out for 6 months. That's the way I've approached my cases. You know, in the subchapter 5 world, you're working with quick deadlines, and you need to keep those cases moving. And I take that same approach with my chapter 7 cases. I think debtors want their discharges. I'm anticipating an influx of cases. ABI today was speculating that business cases were going to be coming, I think, in May, and consumer cases in June and July in large numbers. So from my perspective, it's important to keep the paper moving, so to speak, even though we're paperless at this point. And so that's what I've taken from subchapter 5 cases. Thought I had another thought there, but.
And there was one question last week about how are trustees dealing with the asset administration, sale of real estate, handling other assets. I did get one new asset case since the COVID-19 situation arose involving a toy store, actually, that I used to frequent when my kids were smaller. It's kind of sad, but it has been a little bit difficult. The proprietor of that shop is elderly and in sort of the most dangerous category, and doesn't want to leave her house, understandably. I needed to take control of the location, so I was able to just have her forward the keys and the passcodes, security codes, and things to me. So I went up, basically did a photo inventory, put my stickers on the doors, and basically call it a day at that until we figure out more how to deal with it. I reached out to my auctioneer. Turns out I think his wife tested positive, and so they're under house quarantine. So I'm looking around for other options at the time, but it is going to create a lot of issues going forward, I can tell.
Yeah, I'm in Michigan, where we have a stay-at-home order, and the information out there is that realtors are not an essential service. And so I don't know how you can be showing homes at this point or making much progress towards listing property. And it's just the hand we've been dealt. So.
Yeah, we have a couple
We have
of real estate
from
that are on hold. Okay, sorry, Jennifer.
No, you finish. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. Go ahead.
We just have a few real estate closings that are on hold, so we just keep issuing addendums to the agreement to, postpone it for another week or 2 weeks, whatever, until we can actually sit down and do a closing.
So I'm surprised that you couldn't accomplish a closing. I will tell you, my dad did a closing just this week on some real estate he was selling. I think it's easier if you're farther along in the process. I can envision a situation where, you hear of people like even signing documents on car hoods. One person steps up, signs the document, steps away, another person steps up, notarizes it. You still can accomplish a lot of that with social distancing. So I might be inclined, if I had something that close to closing, to push for it to close. But I think the beginning process of listing real estate is really challenging right now.
Right. I'll have to try that. We haven't thought that one through yet.
Well, Michigan also has a remote notary statute. There are only 4 approved vendors. I've never used it myself, but I don't know what the process is or whether there's something like that in your state, but something to consider.
Well, for one property where I represent the trustee, the property is located in Maryland, so we were able to do a remote closing by just exchanging the documents, and so that one is going through, but Pennsylvania is a little more difficult, I guess.
Jennifer, did you say we had a question?
Yes, Dave Ostrander had his hand raised, so I'm going to unmute David and allow him to ask his question.
Great.
David, I think you are able to speak. In case he isn't, it looks like he may have, he also typed a question in, so this might be it. His question was, how are numerous calls being handled when arriving at one time for their meetings? For example, if 5 meetings are scheduled for 9 a.m., perhaps as many as 10 calls or more coming in at one time. Also, are calls for the 9:30 meetings interrupting ongoing meetings? Again, this is by telephone meetings. Thanks.
This is exactly why I didn't want to use the conference line that was provided by the U.S. Trustee's Office. And anyone that's had any conference call type meetings with numerous people involved, where there's a sound every time someone enters, there's a sound every time someone leaves. There's all the background noise of what's going on, trying to figure out who's there, who should be speaking, who isn't speaking. It seems to me to be just a nightmare. I know that the U.S. trustee thought through a lot of these issues, and the procedures that they sent along to us were very thoughtful. But I still think it's a very difficult process to conduct the meetings through that system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and doesn't Zoom offer you the ability to mute all participants? You have to unmute them if...
Yes.
Yeah.
You can set up Zoom so that everyone that comes into the meeting room or the waiting room is automatically muted, and so they can't you can't hear them until no one can hear them until you actually unmute them. So Zoom, you have the power if you have the pay for account, which is kind of nice.
Speaking of which, I do want to put in a plug for this afternoon's cocktail hour. So we'll be doing that by Zoom. That's a product that I've just started using after I heard it from Tamara Ogier, but I think it fits us really well, fits our needs really well. It's like $15 a month for the pro version. You can do it on a month-to-month basis. But anyway, if you're new to Zoom or you just want to join us for cocktails, feel free to sign up. The email went around last night. That's going to be at 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time because it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
We have one other question from Ray Obachowski. He said, in using the video conference, has anyone had any experience in requesting the debtor to perhaps move around their residence? For instance, Gary, are those framed prints behind you original limited edition? Or Jason, were those baseballs on your desk signed by Babe Ruth or Moose Gowron from the earlier Washington Senators?
Ray, I was not so bold as to have the debtor walk around their house with the video, but there was one case last week where there was an artifact on the wall behind the debtor that was very interesting to me, and it seemed like it would be pretty valuable. But it turned out it was not the debtor's house; it was the debtor's parents' house, so it wasn't his property. But yeah, I mean that is an issue. I suppose we could do that. Kelly has a reluctant look on her face.
No, I'm looking at our list of things that people had asked us to cover, and protecting trustees from the virus. I'm not sure that we can give you any better information than you've gotten from the CDC and other sources like that. I think these remote meetings go a long way towards keeping people safe in our world. I know that, again, on March 15th, I moved my assistant to her house. I just saw what was coming. And about a week before our governor ordered stay at home, I adapted much of that. Our courts are going towards telephonic hearings. I can't think of any right now that are being held in person. I do have a case right now where I need to defend a settlement that I entered into as a trustee. So we are talking about postponing that for a few months until we can have an evidentiary hearing in person. I think those are the steps that most districts are probably taking or will eventually be taking.
The Third Circuit, which is the circuit in which our district is located, has sent out almost weekly notices that basically gives a district by district summary, and pretty much that's the same here for every district in the Third Circuit.
We have a couple other quick questions. Eric Perkins said he did his meetings telephonically, and the debtors and their counsel were instructed prior to the meeting that when they join the meeting, they should mute their phones and wait for their case to be called. With a couple of exceptions, it went fine. So that was more comment.
That's good.
And then Brian Shapiro asked, is there anything that our service providers can do to assist us, or have they provided anyone anything that can assist us?
Well, my service provider helped with this docket entry that needed to be filed to provide notice to all creditors. That was extremely useful, and it is saving a lot of time and effort now that it's set up. It took a little bit of time to get it set up, but now that it's set up, it'll be, you know, extremely valuable going forward. In terms of the 341 meeting process itself, I don't really see any other possible input. I don't know, Kelly, if you have any different experience.
I agree with you. I know my software provider has on their homepage, you know, reach out to us if you need help with rescheduling these meetings, or reach out in general. So I feel like they've extended the hand, and that's much probably needed.
Right.
And I can also say that I've added that as a question to the follow-up survey. That will be one of the questions when we close this meeting in our survey. So if you don't mind maybe giving us that feedback, we can then share that with the service provider so that they know other ways that they can possibly help.
You know, there was a question that was on Jennifer's list that she compiled. Would you recommend requiring prior registration for debtors and attorneys for 341 meetings using Zoom? Gary, you and I chatted about that a little bit. I have not required that for my next meeting date, but with the security issues, would that perhaps be a step towards making the meeting more secure?
If you decided to go that route, I think that it is one method to make the meeting more secure, requiring registration. From the few stories that I've read about how hackers are basically, you know, jumping into these Zoom meeting situation. But at the same time, I'm a strong advocate of the waiting room, which also has features that would, well, there's two things that you can do. You can set it up so that the default is that no one can share the screen as they come into the meeting, which I think is probably a good security measure to do anyway. And then during the meeting, you can open and close those if you have the paid for account. So that should be done, and the muting should be done. And with those security features using the waiting room, I think you're probably going to be able to avoid any attacks like the synagogue. And I understand someone was doing a presentation for their PhD dissertation, and someone came in and started showing pornographic material during that. If those defaults had been set, those security precautions had been taken, then they wouldn't have been able to get in, to my understanding. So I'm not sure registration is all that more useful than some of the other things that are already built into Zoom.
Well, let me ask you this. If people don't register and you have 10 names in the waiting room, or 10 phone numbers in the waiting room, or what do you have in the waiting room to know who to bring into your next meeting?
The people that log in through Zoom, through a video conferencing, it usually has their name. They're usually signed up for Zoom or signed into the conference using their name. So that's easy. The only ones that were not readily identifiable were the people that dial in, because if they dialed in from a smartphone, it might have their name because people put their name on their smartphone. But if it's a landline, it definitely just had the telephone number. But what I would do is look at the waiting room and match the ones that I could match, attorney, client. And then for the ones I couldn't match, I would go in one by one and ask who it was, make a note of that, put them back out in the waiting room, and then, you know, match them as I went through. It actually was not that difficult a process. Most of the people participated by video anyway, and so it was pretty easy to match people up.
Great.
There is also a document on a blog post on our website. We have a new resource page on our website. You guys can see the link on your screens, but there is a blog post from Zoom that addresses some of the best ways to keep people out of, they call them party crashers, basically to keep them out of your Zoom meetings. And they do recommend maybe using passwords or registering to help accomplish that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Zoom because so many trustees may be using that going forward, but there is a feature where you can either use the same ID number for each meeting, or it can generate a unique ID number for each meeting. And I've moved towards the unique ID number. I think that's going to help cut down on the potential for party crashers.
Unfortunately, I was with you, Kelly, until the U.S. trustee required us to put that information on the docket. And so in order to do that, I would have to have some system to change the docket entry every single time or for every single meeting. And that's just too complicated. So I've gone back to just using my one meeting ID and using that. It does, you know, have a potential risk of somebody seeing that on the docket and deciding they want to party in the 341 room, but we'll just have to deal with it if it comes up, I guess.
Can people in the meeting room see each other in a sense or interact with each other, or are they separate from each other as well?
You mean in the waiting room?
Correct, sorry. Yeah.
I don't think they can interact with each other in the waiting room, no. They're basically on hold.
Yeah, with the waiting room and bringing people in and knowing who you're bringing in, I think it would be really hard to crash a party,
Right.
but
Right.
risk is still there.
Yeah. But someone could crash a 341 meeting if it was live too. So you'd have to deal with that.
Another question is regarding how you handle interpreters on conference lines and on Zoom calls.
So on Zoom, that's where I use my cell phone to conference in the interpreter and leave that open on my desk while I'm using Zoom so that the interpreter can hear the debtor and my questions and do the interpretation. That's my plan. I haven't had to implement it yet, but that's what I plan to do when that comes around.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
I don't think there's any way that in the system that we have that the interpreter can actually be invited into the Zoom, because usually it's a receptionist basically pulling in the interpreter from wherever the interpreter is located. So
I thought I saw, but maybe this was another program or maybe I was just dreaming, but I thought I saw where you could call out from Zoom and invite people in, but maybe that's another program.
oh, actually, no, you're right. There is an invitation. I haven't used that yet, or I haven't learned how to use it, but there is an invitation process. So maybe there is a way to invite them in.
Yeah, maybe that would work.
You have to look into that. It would obviously be better if they were right in the feed so that the speech, so, you know, the sound is better quality. But you just make do with the best that you can, I guess.
I think that's the goal and the theme here.
Yeah, right. The one question a trustee had for me last week is how do I deal with those debtors, attorneys, or pro se debtors that just refuse to participate, you know, in any kind of remote session. And my answer to that is I have a joint motion, stipulation, and order to basically continue the 341 meeting indefinitely, and the order extends all of the deadlines until 60 days after the conclusion of the meeting of creditors. So yeah, the way I look at it, I can't really compel them. I don't really want to take the time to try to compel them. I guess the thing to do is simply we'll deal with it on the other side.
Yeah, and I think that's similar to the approach I would take if I run into that. I know the procedure in our district is if the debtor fails to appear twice, we refer them to the U.S. trustee's office. I think they still want us to do that. Then they typically file a motion to compel the debtor to appear. But I would also be filing a motion to extend deadlines. And it seems to me when a debtor figures out that they're not getting their discharge till New Year's Eve, I think they're going to want to, get with their attorney and show up for the 341.
Right, exactly.
We have another question. Following the same, this may have been talked about earlier, but for bulk docketing, were you able to docket through your software as well?
Yeah, that was the process that that we worked out. First, we worked with the clerk's office to make sure that the docketing that would meet the U.S. trustees we would also be something that where you could do batch filings using the software. We are very fortunate to have a deputy clerk who is very tech savvy. He was able to basically do modifications of the entries within literally 5 or 10 minutes to set it up. And then once we had that set, the software provider came in and used the training site and was able to very quickly figure out how to pull the data from my 341 list and upload it into the various fields in the ECF system. And then we also have to attach a PDF document, so it automatically pulls the PDF document that's created through the merge system in the software. And you have a very nice notice to creditors that's attached to that docket entry that provides them with all the information they need to be able to participate. It frankly provides a debtor too if they, miss your email or something.
Mm-hmm. I'm not doing anything automated, but I've only got about 20 meetings every day, and my first set of meetings coming up aren't until April 21st. So I'm just working with my assistant, and we're getting that done. We are merging documents with our 341 information, but we're e-filing it just as we usually would.
Another question was, if you continue indefinitely, will you have to change the case to an asset case after the required period?
I hope not. This is an area where I'm trying to accommodate the U.S. trustees' prohibition on having person-to-person 341 meetings, and at the same time accommodating a debtor who feels for whatever reason that they can't do a 341 meeting any other way. So I don't think that I'm going to be bound by the internal 120-day rule that we have with our U.S. trustee. But I guess I'll have to deal with that when it comes up in 120 days.
And then, have you guys considered having a staff co-host a meeting with you? Would that be helpful for someone who is techno challenged?
I think, I would think that could be very helpful. Definitely. I guess there's no reason why that person couldn't be remoted in too. So, yeah, I think it could be very helpful.
Yeah, I think it just depends on how you work. I generally don't have anyone with me at the 341, and I'm pretty comfortable working on the computer. I do believe that you might be able to sign up for a second Zoom account, and then you would be able to have a co-host that way. But I think that would require 2 accounts.
That's probably right. Or if your assistant is, very techno savvy, maybe they host the meeting and you would be just a participant and they would be the one that would set up each meeting. That would be a possibility too.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think we've kind of exceeded the time limit that we were going to go for today. Looks like the questions have pretty much all been answered. So um, thank you for joining us today. We're hoping to continue this process going forward, especially since there's been so much positive feedback. I know Jennifer is going to be sending out some questions after today's session. Please answer those so that we can have a really good idea of how to best proceed with these.
Right.
And don't forget Kelly's happy hour at 5 o'clock. Looking forward to that.
Speaking of that, we had one more kind of more fun poll that we could share just to give everyone a little bit of a less serious question.
Shout out to Dave Watkins for the inspiration kindness.
Of course, Dave.
Well, Dave sent an email that said, this is like Vegas. You know, you lose track of time and everybody's losing money and you're drinking cocktails at all hours or stuff.
Right. I'm really sad that I can't vote for this one. I could have predicted that.
That's excellent.
We'll know how many are actually, if they answered truthfully or not, by how many people are coming to our happy hour later, depending on when it is for them in their time zone.
Yeah.
Right.
Last I knew we had about 22 registered, but that was this morning that I last looked, so.
Oh, wait, we have one more question from John Hargrave. Let me see if I can unmute him, hopefully. John, I think you are unmuted if you're able to speak. He raised his hand. Oh, he may be out now.
Well, John, you know how to reach me, so feel free to send me an email. Oh, there he is.
How do I join the cocktail party?
John
So
will
there was,
send you an invite.
what?
We can send him an invite.
Yeah, there was an invite sent around, but Jennifer says she'll get another copy out to you.
It was on the listserv too, right, Jennifer?
It wasn't on the listserv, I don't think. I didn't put it on the listserv, but I did just send out like a mass email to everyone, but I can forward it to John. It went out yesterday afternoon.
All right, should we call it good?
I think we've covered what we can cover for today. So stay safe, everyone, and hope to have a drink with you at 5.
Sounds good. Or anytime you want to join, it's 5 to 7, so don't feel like you have to be up for the whole time. BYBO.
All right.
Jennifer, thanks so much for all your work. You're just fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. All right.